Hello, hello, builders! This is The Engine. I'm your host, Sasha Berry. The Engine is a show about building in Web3 and with Web3. So whether you're already building in the space or you're just trying to figure out what this whole Web3 thing is about, how it applies to your business, what it can give you, you're in the right place. Stick around. The Engine is powered by Skylab, a community of Web3 builders, founders, and funders. Between ourselves, we often describe it as AA for founders, except for we're not trying to quit being founders. It's kind of the opposite. We're trying to stick with it, and it's always better with a friend. And it's even better when it's a good community. Actually, in this week's episode, we talk about how an environment, an ecosystem is so vital for building and how it impacts your success. So, if you're looking for a good group of builders in Web3, consider Skylab. Check out the website, skylab.xyz, and fill out the form. It's very easy. The membership is free, but it's invitation only. So make sure to put a note that you heard about it on the Engine, and somebody will reach out to you. The link is in the description. So this week, my guests and I talk about startup cities, and my guests are Nick Smoot and Chris Pennino. Nick is an investor, entrepreneur, real estate developer, and ecosystem builder who has been executing his community first, real estate second thesis for the last decade. His work in startup ecosystems has been recognized by Google, Milken Institute, and Bloomberg. He has spent time in over 200 cities working with governments, working with education institutions, industry, and community members, trying to figure out how to build startup cities. And based on all this experience, he wrote a book called Better, a guide how to build creative communities that transform the world. Chris Pennino is an architectural scholar, designer, and consultant. He has worked on a broad variety of projects in different roles, and ranging from environmental design to publishing to Web3, but his personal research focuses on special economic zones and how technology developments impact our built environments. He serves as head of architecture and urbanism at Serca Budowa. It's a startup city that's being built outside of Kiev in Ukraine for internally displaced people. He is also the chief of research and development at Build Cities. So both my guests have a lot of experience in the startup cities. But why we're talking about it on this Web3 podcast? Well, first of all, where you live has a huge impact on what you build, how you succeed. But also, people have been moving a lot in the last few years. Ever since the pandemic hit, the workplace has become much more decentralized. Teams are created across the continents. Our options have increased, but our needs still are similar. So if you're living in Los Angeles, New York, Miami, London, Seoul, Tokyo, Singapore, those places provide a lot for startups. There's a lot of community, there's a lot of funding, there's a lot of events. The possibilities for serendipities to occur are high. But if you don't live in one of those huge ecosystems, how do you create an environment around yourself and for your community that can empower innovation, that can empower entrepreneurship and building and investment? These are the kind of things that we are going to be thinking more in the coming years as the world continues to be more and more decentralized. And Web3 is part of the fabric that allows to keep those connections and maintain them. So we cover a lot, and we'll get right into it. But first, a quick word about contributors of the Season 1 of The Engine, Threshold Network and Build Cities. Threshold Network provides a suite of threshold cryptography services. So if you're building an application that involves private data and trusting an intermediary won't fly, you may want to check out Taco, which is the only encryption and access control plugin that is end-to-end decentralized. So what is Taco for? Builders are using it in various applications such as seed phrase recovery, crypto inheritance, media libraries management, and even concealing in-game assets. And these are just some of the use cases. You can use Taco to build a decentralized password manager or location sharing plugin, or even a live streaming platform, or any other dApp that involves private data. So go to threshold.network, check out TACO documentation, and see how you can easily integrate that plugin into your dApp. Build Cities is a global cooperative of startup cities. The world is changing rapidly. Resources and expertise that are so needed to create businesses and innovation used to be locked into certain ecosystems for centuries. But now, these resources are flowing freely around the world, empowering local communities. Passports and visas may still limit our ability to travel, but we can teleport anywhere over Zoom and collaborate with our partners all over the world. Build Cities is creating a digital infrastructure that empowers this collaboration and innovation and connects builders from all over the world. Check out their website and see how in this new world, Lagos is not far from Los Angeles and London, and Nassau is right next to Phuket and Paris. You can join the community right now with your Discord login. You can also mint a Dream, which is a collaborative AI NFT that serves as a pass to the entire Build Cities ecosystem, including all of their IRL events throughout the year around the country. The link is in the description. And now let's dive into my conversation with Nick Smoot and Chris Pennino. Chris, Nick, welcome to the engine.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about startup cities, and Chris and Nick have a lot of knowledge and experience in this world. So Web3 is sort of tangential in this conversation, but I'm always, since it is a Web3 podcast, a Web3 show, I'm always curious, how did you get into Web3?
Even as far back as like 2015, 2016-ish, we were hosting gatherings around crypto and had some of the early kind of funds and standing room onlys and bars, kind of like very old world, kind of think of reading the papers and gathering in pubs to talk about, how to rebuild America. And so we built community around the bleeding edge of where everything was going. And so the DAOs and blockchain and crypto, I've always been curious, definitely not leaning in as a practitioner nor an architect on the ends of a technical fundamental structuring, but very very forward thinking on community endowments and ways to pool equity and create ways to track contribution to the social fabric of a city. And so I've been doing that for a decade and been thinking about it for about 15 years and how to contribute value back and forth. So when DAOs and kind of the ledger became better at tracking IRL activity, it became more of like these two paths may cross versus having to do like an old school co-op, even though a lot of DAOs still form as co-ops, which is kind of the irony of it all. Like it's old world meets new world. So I'm not a technical practitioner, but definitely have been tracking the game.
Tracking the game, and definitely a community practitioner. And community is definitely a big word in Web3 and a big idea, and people are still figuring it out. So you definitely have that part figured out. Chris, what's your path into crypto, into Web3?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same of coming at it from an anti-technical practice standpoint, but I was in grad school. I was doing a master's in architecture, and I was very set on kind of taking this academic research architectural route because I always understood, I studied architecture as opposed to getting an MFA or getting my master's in English literature and following my like previous kind of paths, because I understood architecture as this way to understand the built environment, which is the kind of this very like omnipresent thing that we all kind of deal with on a daily basis. And architectural academia and research became a way for me to kind of constantly reorient or re-understand the way that we deal with the built environment. And I did my master's. I was researching. I was teaching at an institution here in Los Angeles and kind of just hanging around the architectural academic scene and field. And I kind of constantly felt like this sense of complacency, like these people that were kind of tasked with discursively, um, discursively leading this this idea of the built environment are constantly these people that were supposed to be on the cutting edge of defining how the world around us looks and feels and how we live in it. Were constantly just kind of sitting on their hands and not really having any kind of even not even really like negotiating with things that were happening in the world. So I was like, well, what is kind of happening in the world? Who are the people that are reinventing the built environment? And I kind of came across the startup cities ecosystem and started to kind of divide it up according to like projects in the space. So, there's like, I call it like the hardware and the software startup cities. So the hardware is
Interesting.
like,
Yeah,
there's
we'll
like,
we'll get into that. Yeah, for sure. And so
yeah.
I'm trying to get how did crypto get into this?
So it's not really a crypto thing necessarily. I mean, like I was like, there's projects like the hardware projects are like Prospera, Praxis, people that are like, we're going to build a city. And there's not necessarily some kind of technical idea behind it or some kind of crypto idea, or if it is, it's tangential. And then I came across Build, which is like, I think of that as more of like a software, like providing the tools for these kind of startup cities and communities and kind of providing this change in the built environment. I met Angelo. I kind of talked with him, and yeah, that was kind of my inlet into the more like tech side of startup cities.
Got it. Amazing. So, what is a startup city and why do we care about startup cities? Nick.
That's a funny question because I think there's people who think a startup city is buying a ghost town and turning it into a better city. There's a gentleman out there doing that. I think people think it's Bill Gates buying ranch land and someday might build something. It's Neom, where you have endless amounts of money to build new infrastructure. It's also collapsed Erie Canal cities trying to figure out their way forward. And I would argue it's boroughs of New York and even places like San Marcos trying to figure out how they fit into the San Antonio Austin puzzle. So my argument around that, I think, is it's very poorly defined. Charter cities could be something that would probably be better language, and that's not a slam on you, Sasha, for using the phrase startup cities because like it's the language. But in my opinion,
Right.
I think a charter city is very different, right? It's I'm going to build something new and almost manifest it, do alchemy with the dirt, and gather humans, and we shall do magic and create facilities and buildings. I personally believe a startup city can be nothing more, or quite simply, a city who's been in an industrial revolution malaise that finally decides they want to put both feet on the ground again and get out of bed and quit doom scrolling about their past and decide that they want to coalesce their people around a shared vision that has a citywide metric that they should all move towards and individual ways they can play in that involve them discovering together, dreaming about their individual and holistic kind of togetherness plus their individual, plan on how to do it, and then deliver against that. And that wheel becomes the new social system for that city. So it's just a reboot, in my opinion. And so I think this whole movement towards let's go build new cities is misguided and missing the point of the thousands that are already saying we need help and spending trillions and trillions of dollars on that, by the way.
Right.
That's a whole nother piece to talk about. Um, uh, yeah, but I think it's just people trying to build a better tomorrow together would be a startup city.
Yeah. Well, I like that idea of getting out of industrial age malaise and getting into the new age and connecting in new ways and building new things. That does require, though, initiative. Chris, what's your definition of those charter or startup cities, of those innovative hubs, whatever you call them? How do you think about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that working in this space, you in a way like are constantly trying to even redefine the like vernacular or language around like what you're producing, because there really is no way to define any one project. But yeah, it's like it's kind of like how I defined my own entry into the space earlier. I think that I just look at startup cities and the whole spectrum of projects as people who are moving against any kind of perceived austerity in their built environment, whether that's on like a local level, on a state level, on a federal level, even on an international global scale. People are thinking about these projects in like a space scale and like the colonization of new planets and atmospheres. And it's so it's any kind of like pushback against perceived austerity or kind of staleness in like one's perception of the built environment. I would say that's my broad definition of a startup city or a charter city project.
That's a very broad definition. It's interesting. Nick, what was your experience of building those communities and creating those environments, and how did you get into that?
Really, I got into it through weirdly working with teenagers and being having programs banned from schools because we were too good at creating social change, which sounds peculiar, but one year in particular, we got a majority of high school students to all wear white t-shirts on the first week of school to represent this concept that their identity is not trapped by what they're trying to project, but like that be actually yourself and bring yourself to high school and who you are, your goals, your mission, and see each other that way and look beyond. Are you wearing this cool brand or does your shirt represent this cool thing? Which might sound odd to arc that into economics and social infrastructure and social architecture, but that was my beginning. Was could I get teenagers to behave, comply, connect, and create in their community in a meaningful way? Then I started three of my own startups along the way in psychology, for ed tech, prop tech, and then a business intelligence company. Go full circle. I'm in LA. I'm a part of the Milken Institute as a young leader there, thinking about job creation, access to capital, medical cures globally. And the Occupy movement breaks out. And it gave me almost a look back into my past where the same angst that teenagers have seemed to be represented by a bunch of adults sleeping on city hall lawns that were looking for a purpose, a plan, something to put their energy towards, just like teenagers. And very foolishly, just like we did with teenagers didn't exist before the Industrial Revolution. They were created post. I don't know if anybody here knows that, but it's this really magical thing. You were a child, then you were adult. You had a role to play. And then once we concentrated in large cities, created factories, and removed children from any type of labor, all of a sudden we got latchkey kids, we got teenagers, we had a little bit of extra discretionary income. So now these people who were truly evolved to go from learning about the universe to playing a key role didn't have a role to play anymore. And so angst was created, mental health issues, all these problems that kind of stem from this call it a float period that's just extended, to be quite frank. And so the same thing was happening with these people on City Hall lawns going, I don't have a role to play anymore in the global economic game, and I want one. And I'm going to scream for one at City Hall. And then I realized, oh, this is no different than my past. I wonder if I could take what I've done with startups that I've learned and what I know about community. Can I smash those together and channel this energy from City Hall and these people here into them, setting goals, learning skills, and building companies together? And can we architect governments and large corporations to underwrite or provide capital and support to people who are willing to actually do the work? And can we build that bridge? So over a decade ago, I launched that experiment, and fast forward, we've done it 3 countries, 16 states, governor's offices, prime ministers, central banks. And our primary task is designing social infrastructure and economic systems that get the population base to move together. And the real, to answer your question quite bluntly, the real answer is I just think people are magic. And when they don't have a role to play with clear goals they love, they act like idiots. And Occupy helped me see the world act like idiots again. And not that they are bad in what they want, but their behavior was misguided. And I think all the players, meaning the 1% and the 99, are not bad people. I think they're just disconnected and they both can act like idiots. So we need a better bridge. And that's how I kind of got into it.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, what was the first step when you decided to do that? You had this grand vision,
Yeah,
and how do you go about, okay, let's connect 1% and 99?
totally, totally. So I then redesigned what got me to a point of my life, and not that it's perfect, but that I had the ability to. I liked myself. I could come up with an idea, and build a company around it, scale it, sell it. I read books. I had a good network. I'm confident. I have friends. I have a good family, and just thought, all right, what the hell? And then how do I understand what those like pivotal key tentpole moments were? And then I design a social system to explore, do those add value to other people as well? So I went back and mapped these key pivotal things and realized, well, one, I'm exposed to inspiring people and inspiring stories. Two, so I can discover what's out there and get access to these people. Two, I have communities and networks where I can share my ideas that flow freely, get feedback, wrestle with them with other people, and I can offer my help and skills in service of those. And we discuss relevant information that's rapidly changing so we can stay abreast of what's happening in the world. Three, I then have systems that help me learn the skills, become a better person, and do the work to move towards my goals that I'm discovering in this loop. So I thought, I don't know, these are the key tent poles. How might I start with the first one, which is expose people to great stories, mentors, inspiring things. So we launched basically what we're doing here as in-person gatherings in a community called Fireside Chats. A lot of people do them. We do them a bit different though. We go after the United Way, construction companies, churches, schools, the business networks, the chambers. We invite everyone to come to these events to tell the stories of local leaders who've been completely kicked in the mouth before. They've had big wins. We talk about their childhood. We ask about, what was your family like? Did your parents divorce when you were young? Did you have siblings? Who were you? We get really into the meaty shit that helps people go, oh, I'm a little more like you. We both put pants on. And you start to realize success is not some thing out there. It's actually right here. And we can be in the same room discussing. So we tried that. And I put together a deck that kind of laid out these pillars. And then my thesis of how to start each component, which used the appreciative inquiry process of discover, dream, design, deliver, which is what we use with teenagers, and mapped it with the psychology and kind of the behavior change systems, and then got together for coffee with two of my homies. I was like, hey, I kind of want to create like Boy Scouts meets Girl Scouts meets Techstars meets the Chamber meets like I don't know what, but like let's just try this thing. Who's up for it? And they're like, I'm in. And they both bailed within like 2 months. And I just kept going because I think I'm either dumb or smart or something. But I can say this, we launched the first one, like 60 people showed up. And then the next month we did it again. And I committed to doing it for 6 months. Within 3 months, we started launching the other environments because people were showing up with hardware in their pockets and people were having significant life and behavior change. And we just saw this kind of social fabric quickly form that mattered.
That's
And it was,
beautiful.
yeah, it was incredible. So, I mean, that's how I started, just like anything else, just make up shit.
That's amazing. That whole thing of just make up thing and go and do it always is fascinating to me. One more thing, but when you started building this community and it started forming, it started taking a life of its own. But then the next step, like how did you start connecting with the governments or the businesses? How did it become a bigger thing?
Yeah.
Because it could have
Yeah.
just remained a club.
Totally. It's a great point. So when the original thesis was formed that I put together and started banging up against friends, put together the deck, I then also went to the mayor, the chamber, the university, all the kind of, we call them the stakeholders often, which I think is poorly stated, but went to them and said, hey, I want to run this thing. I'm going to do this. And my thesis is that we can improve mental health, economic outcomes, and retain young people here and become more of a place that people want to stay and grow. Do you want to be a part of it? And the feedback was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Have fun. Cool. Keep me up to speed. And it was like a very like, hey, go for it, big guy.
Sure, go do your thing.
And
Good luck.
yeah, exactly. And so I took that as, all right, we've invited you in. I'll see you on the other side. Versus, oh, no one's going to give me permission to do it. And so then I just did it and then continued to update those people and invite them in. Meaning we would, after it was growing, we then said, hey, we'd like to do a storytelling night of all the mayors. And then you host all 4 of the regional mayors for a night of like, tell me about when you were a little kid. And are your parents divorced? And all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, you can ask the mayors that stuff. Continuing forward, Workforce Council, Economic Development, Department of Commerce in all the states, they care deeply about growing economies, great jobs, all these things. They don't really know what they're doing. Hard stop. College presidents, a lot of politicians and leaders, they're not bad people. But again, a lot of these people are exactly like you and I. And so they're doing their best to make things up, or they're running a playbook they've learned from somewhere else. Most often a playbook they've run from somewhere else. And so if you can bring an alternative approach that is getting results, it's scary, exciting, and they want to play with it, but it's going to have tension. So we became the new toy where people are starting companies, getting patents, raising capital. We're investing in it. We started a co-working space. We brought in fiber just because we're going to go build our fort. Like we're kids building forts. It's a phrase I like to use. If you were anything like me, you built forts with your friends and they were like the coolest. And so when you all of a sudden can get a community that's building its own fort, not in the face of power, but in a like run over to mom and dad a little bit later and go, hey, mayor, look at our little fort. And they're like, what the hell are you building? You're like, but we have a carpet square. We love our fort. And they're like, huh, they love their fort. There's young people there and they're building things. Like, this makes no sense to me. But you can arc that bridge between government and the nascent ember by continuing to show up not in an aggressive manner, but by saying we're moving towards the goals you have as well. But really, it's just asking and showing up to those things with those people. We've been a part of multiple pieces of federal legislation, ranging from opportunity zones, the Chips and Science Act, to National Innovation and Modern Skills Training Act, which is a current one right now about to be reintroduced. I've been architecting. And I'm not a politician or a lobbyist. It's just showing up and throwing the noodles at the wall over and over again and seeing which ones stick.
Well, you have some really, really strong way of showing up, clearly. Chris.
Yeah, maybe.
Chris, so how is your experience in the startup city building relate to what Nick was talking about? Like, how does communities and governments interact in your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that coming into it, I kind of realized that they don't necessarily interact in the way that you think that they do. And I think by that same token, the people that I thought that were most interesting, not just in the startup city space, but in this kind of coming at it again from this kind of like architectural built environment idea, like the people that I found the most interesting were the people kind of creating these alternative ideas of community or interaction. And sometimes, like what Nick was talking about, it manifests in building these spaces. Sometimes it manifests in building software or tools. And then sometimes it manifests in something a lot more direct. So the first project I worked on before I started working with Build, I was connected with um, a guy who started an NGO in Kiev that was basically trying to form a new way of building cities in this kind of post-war Ukrainian landscape. So obviously, like the eastern part of the country from north to south is been completely, rendered. Entire cities have been rendered useless, and all these people that are moving from east to west, uh, the Ukrainian government can't get them to stop leaving the country. So there's this problem of Ukrainian people, young people who build things, moving to Poland, Germany, France, anywhere but the Ukraine. So, uh, and the a government that already might be ill-equipped to handle the scale of war that's happening at the time, like surely does not have the systems in place to uh, create this new urban idea or a new idea of cities that's going to keep young people and give them housing and give them opportunity, etc. So a bunch of NGOs actually have sprouted up in this landscape, which was really interesting to me because I assumed like, oh, this is like, this is feeding time for companies like BlackRock and, private equity to come in and, rebuild the country in this new Western idea. But I was really surprised to find all these NGOs starting up and trying to actually bridge this gap between private funding, various stakeholders in academia, research, tech firms, with this kind of governmental bureaucratic idea and building actual infrastructure.
Well, part of the
So
challenge probably for private capital to come into a situation like that is that the conflict is ongoing and
yeah,
it's hard to predict when it's going to be over. And so it's hard
yeah,
for them to make bets there. It's the government that is local that can't go anywhere else and has to deal with the situation, as horrible as it is, that will have to, and people who want to stay in their homes and who want to
yeah,
build there, that have to do something. And I had no idea that you did that. This is so amazing.
yeah.
Thank you.
No, yeah, of course. I mean, it's in a way, it's like you said, it's kind of providing this runway of sorts. And I hate to use the word like runway in terms of like a conflict, but in like my consulting role, it's kind of providing the context for how and when and infrastructurally, like understanding how a city can be built. So the meat and potatoes of it is that we're working on a startup city on a greenfield site just outside of Kiev, that will eventually house 15,000 displaced people, whether
Wow.
that's veterans, refugees of the war, just basically keeping people in their homes. Yeah, the interesting like startup city side of it that I always tell people is that they're like if different stakeholders want to talk about how can we put the city on chain or how can we do this or how can we layer this or do this or build meshes, Wi-Fi meshes, and it's like building anything. I would say like building a fort in the backyard, building an ADU on your property in Los Angeles, building a barn in Montana. Like I think from an architectural standpoint, building anything is extremely hard, and building anything well is extremely hard. So being able to like scale a project of that size, and have it run efficiently and even just house that amount of people and have it be walkable and shaded and have schools and parks, like that's the kind of like infrastructure building that like interests me from a startup city standpoint. All the kind of like layered stuff is for people much smarter than me to figure out and deal with, and they can come in and sell that as a kind of like product at the end of the day. But uh but yeah, I think there's just like very interesting like applications from a traditional architectural built environment standpoint that I'm kind of working through on that project specifically, and that was my kind of entry into this kind of like city building, space building, environment.
That's so cool. It's interesting how Nick has this community first approach that also is connected to real estate and the physical infrastructure of it. And you kind of come from this architecture and really grounded, literally on earth, on the ground, creating space approach. But both of you are looking at startup cities as sort of this tool that a society could use to transition from one state to another state, to sort of propel itself forward. And I think most people around the world would agree that we are in this place where we need to be propelled into a new place, because where we are at is not healthy, is not comfortable for the majority of people. A lot of people can't even afford a home anymore, and it's a crazy situation. And many startup cities that are existing now, the startup ecosystems like San Francisco, like Los Angeles, like New York, are becoming less and less welcoming to people with ideas who want to create things. It's cost prohibitive to come and be an entrepreneur in some of those locations, unless you have, already have some kind of funding, already come from money. And so, Nick, when you start new projects, when you approach a new territory or a new location, how does that emerge? How does that come about? Do people reach out to you, or you go out and scout a location that maybe needs a boost?
Yeah, it comes multiple directions. Most often it's inbound. I started the first one, left Los Angeles, moved to Idaho, split time kind of between the two to do a pilot, and spent 4 years on the pilot, just proving it made sense. And it got named one of the digital capitals of the United States by Google, cited our work. Brookings, Milken, Bloomberg all kind of tracked the economic change. And from there, we
Amazing.
started to have inbounds. Yeah, thank you. We had inbounds
And
from
so,
other
what's
family
that place?
offices. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Coeur
So it's
d'Alene.
a former
Yes.
timber and yeah, former timber and mining town. Primarily was hospitality and resort community. Now our community alone has created over 300 patents, 1,500 jobs, over 600 million in funding and funds, a 19.1% drop in the poverty rate. I mean, it's an
Wow.
incredible story. The number one real estate market in the United States, number one state for in-migration, um, statewide rapid learning platforms for robotics that we pioneered with Apple and the land grant university. And all of this came from, quite literally, just this pilot. And so then over that next kind of jump of the company, we started having family offices who had a foundation and or real estate interests or a fund or wanted to see a community revived would reach out and ask us if we'd be willing to look at a market. Some governor's offices, sometimes real estate developers, and we started to kind of take the inbound and then go figure out how do we do what we do again. So we kind of took what we learned from it, and then we designed a process where we come in and we'll do a mapping. And a mapping is where we deliver at the end of a mapping as a flourishing plan. And the mapping involves intaking all the desk data we can get on the economics, the demographics, the problems. And then we do the formal stakeholder meetings, but we also do espionage, where we do sentiment mapping. We go into a community, we learn about everyone from the churches, the bars, the grocery stores, the thrift stores, the auto dealerships, and we ask all these questions, and we buy drinks for people at bars. We get the real dirt on a town, and then we mash that all together into this plan around what do people love, how can you build a social system around that. We deliver that, and then we come in and support people along the way. but really it's mostly inbound. We have some larger foundations now that are starting to poke around and ask if we'd look at handling larger amounts of cities. Um, and maybe some point we're, capitalized through the nose, and people see the value of what we do at a higher level, and then we start using our own science to pick markets. But currently, we have some communities that come to us, don't have any money, but they have a big heart, and they say, hey, we want to start your process. We give them our playbook, some software tools, and we support them on quarterly calls and help them use Build and other tools that we've created just to get them going. So, maybe we'll, like I said, be more and more profitable over time and be a little more strategic. But currently, it's more of a movement focused on transforming the world. We've done pilots in Guangzhou, Lodi,
Wow.
Italy, Lethbridge, Canada, all over. It's been a real trip, to be quite frank. I had to say something, by the way. I want to jump back for a second
Yes.
because you talked about the built environment, and people not being able to afford a house, and you also talked about the built environment as a lever of change. And coming back to defining startup cities, there's the quote about the man in the arena, or which is kind of like, being in there doing the work is the crucial thing, and you're going to get attacked for it. It's not going to make sense always, but I often like to use the analogy that the world feels like it's turned into Footloose, and everyone's sitting around asking for permission to dance, and it's like, you can dance, like no one's stopping you. And the idea that somebody else should be fixing the park or that curb. I have some funny stories. One is, my girlfriend and I, we'll go into this park where the benches aren't anchored down, and if we don't like where they are, we move them. There's no signs that say we can't,
Yeah.
and so we redesign the park every so often on purpose to create new flow of people. There was a curb that everyone in town hated, where cars would park so close to this exit from a parking garage. And accidents would almost happen all the time there because you have to go so wide on the turn. You go into the other lane, cars are coming, it's problematic. People petition the city to handle it, do something. Guess what? They wouldn't. So I bought a bucket of yellow paint and I painted the damn curb, and no one parks there. And guess what? The city repaints it now, thinking it's theirs. And so my point is, like, what happened to us as a nation and as a people and as an American dream of realizing the American dream was a shared global experiment of us running into the future and building what we believed in? There were no roads, there were no schools, there were no hospitals, there were no churches. We built shit, and it was hard. And the idea that we're all waiting for the perfect city to be birthed, and that it'll be affordable housing and great jobs, and everyone will say hi to you and wave and blow you kisses as you walk down the street. Like, pound sand, it doesn't exist. If you can't do it today in your own city, you'll never experience it in the future as you wait for everyone else to build it for you. And so I'm a firm believer in the built environment being a place to play, but also understanding that the social system and the social infrastructure and the expectations we layer on people now dictate the kind of future we build. And we're stuck in an economic loop of just build more shit, consume more things, charge people more, and everyone's locked onto their TVs complaining about the future versus pioneering one we believe in. And that might mean moving and not having a Prada down the road. I don't give a shit. So my point in saying that is, when we think about startup cities, when we think about blockchain, when we think about crypto, when we think about the tools being created, if we don't actually address building a city we like, with shade we like, with people that are going to behave a certain way, that's about moral fabric and expectations, and then action. And so we need that now in your own neighborhood, not waiting for some vote that obviously gives everyone permission. Like, just damn dance. It's not Footloose. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I love
That out
it.
there.
I love
I
it.
think building on that too, like if you think that, like, if you're waiting on some, $60,000 a year government employee who sits in his office all day to rubber stamp these ideas for you, like you're already like defeated. And I think that, that's the idea of creating this leverage, whether it's in the Ukraine or in Idaho or in Los Angeles. Like, you have the ability, whatever economic systems, or where people call it neoliberalism, people call it whatever they want to call it, whatever has led people to believe that you constantly need this bureaucratic permission or to go through these bureaucratic systems to create any idea of change, it couldn't be more wrong. And I think that there is something about, you can move, you can go somewhere where you have more leverage, but I think there's always leverage to be had. I think that there's leverage to be had in Los Angeles, there's leverage to be had in Idaho, there's leverage to be had in North Texas. Like, whatever you want to do, whenever you want to build it, it's about like creating these alternative physical spaces, communities, networks of people. Just this complete reliance on existing bureaucratic systems is the reason that we're kind of in this place of, I can't do this, or I can't get this built, or I can't. I'm a total like believer in working outside of these systems, and I think that the startup city ecosystem has made me believe that more so, because there are people that are just going and doing it. Even in architecture academia, are these people who are creating the most contemporary zeitgeisty buildings or versions of the built environment on a domestic or urban scale. It's all reliant on working with governments, city planners, local officials, city officials. Like, you don't have to do that in any sense.
And so how would you suggest people go about it?
Working on this project in the Ukraine, seeing this kind of power of bringing together stakeholders, like whether they can be very like bureaucratic and traditional stakeholders. Like, we have people who've worked in government all their lives. We have people who've been in academia all of their lives. We have, 20 something private equity people. We have people building, tech firms in Germany that are, accumulating this like wealth and various products that they want to layer onto cities, and they want to have their stake in the built environment. So, just like Nick gathering a bunch of people to build like a so-called fort in a city, and going back to a local municipality and seeing, hey, look at all this like dirt we're kicking up. Like, you have to listen to us at some point, or you have to give us some kind of seat at the table. I think that kind of like stitching together all of these stakeholders in a non-traditional way and repackaging it as a kind of like new product is something that will like gather people's attention.
When I think to that point, that's where build in a lot of ways is creating a better game for people to play. And it's using a bit of anonymity to where people can be anonymous on the platform if they want. Locality, where you can find people in IRL, the real world, and URL. And it's around goals, growth, and gatherings. Goals, growth, and gatherings are super crucial, that people can start to set a better game and get credit for what they contribute. There's something key to that is surfacing what Chris is talking about, of like, take action. And this isn't new. Let's come back to like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. They get buttons and patches and bells and whistles, right? Like, people, we like boondoggles. And so if our boondoggle can actually translate to not only real, actual economic value, but also social and political credit within my community, that I'm taken more seriously because I contribute in a meaningful way, I show up for my community, that's a much more interesting game to play. And so when we think about what's gone on with this malaise, that's where build is playing. It's creating quite literally like a new game for the world to play, of like, this is how we build cities. And I believe that functional pivot is what starts to unlock. Chris said kicking up dust. I like to use sometimes when I'll give presentations to economists, I'll use the analogy that Horton Hears a Who is the greatest book on economics of all time. If you don't have children, you probably haven't read Horton Hears a Who, or you don't remember it's the book about Dr. Seuss's book of like the elephant with the huge ass ears, who can like hear these little people that live on a powder, like a puffball, this tiny little puffball, and his huge ears give him the ability to hear these little people called the Who's. And the Who's live on this tiny puffball, and he's convinced that they need help, and wants to like listen to these little puffballs, and he can hear one who's like, oh, but all the people on the puffball don't understand there's a whole nother world happening out there. And so they need to figure out how to self-organize so they can actually have one voice in unity to speak about a future they believe in and want. And all of a sudden, this puffball all of a sudden shouts loud enough that all of the other people besides the elephant can finally hear the voice from this little puffball. And this whole like cartoon is about everyone accusing this elephant of being insane and everyone accusing this one little person on this puffball of being insane. But really, it's around a lack of unity and voice so that people who are in control of the larger game can actually hear. And so when we understand that there needs to be more harmony around a game we're playing so there can be more control and voice, it really is a game changer for building cities and startup cities. And that's why I'm so long on social infrastructure and harnessing an economic shared vision people can believe in versus let's just be innovative or let's be excellent at building startups. Okay, that's every other city. What makes you different?
I really relate to that whole creating a voice and recognizing that you have a voice and that you can express what you wish for and can create a movement. Coming from Russia, one of the things that have been difficult for me living there is sort of this cynical attitude that people have been beaten into where, oh, nothing good will happen. What's the point of trying? Don't even bother. And it's predominant sense. And people, younger people who want to create change feel sort of trapped in that environment often. I personally felt that way. So I got myself out all the way to California to the world of yes, we can. But I always feel, I feel sad for so many people around the world. And it's interesting because I had the conversation with a builder from Brazil who is developing a Web3 community in Brazil. And they're facing a very similar mentality there because people are not used to having the opportunity and growing up with this sort of American thing where, yes, we can, go do your thing, go build it. And I think that build, and thank you, Nick, for pivoting there, has this opportunity of expanding this yes, we can mentality and creating this opportunity to many different places across the world. And I find it really, really beautiful. So I want, Chris, can you talk a little bit more about how you see yourself? You're more of a infrastructure on the ground, on the earth builder. How do you see yourself in this digital space?
Well, that's really interesting because I have this kind of like polarity in my experience where there is like I've worked in like the most traditional architectural building firms like developing mini malls in Southern California. I've also worked in this like academic research side of things, and in my like academic research I got really into this idea of think tanks, and I read this book. It's actually right here. It's called Think Tank Aesthetics by Pamela Lee, and it's about the origins of like the Rand Corporation and think tanks in the United States, and it's kind of ties to like the modern art and modern aesthetics movement. Anyways, I met Angelo and he kind of explained the whole build ecosystem, and I was kind of familiar with it through my experience in the space. And he was like, well, we want to start this research and development wing of build. And I was like, well, cool, this is how I would do it. And I basically pitched this. I was in the Discord, I was in these meetings, and I was meeting all these people who like not only reminded me of academics that I was around and people that were doing research, but were in a way so much more like had so much more potentiality in them because they were untethered from institutions. Like someone starting someone building a startup around like Web3 oncology and healthcare, and all these people just building things from their bedrooms essentially and doing very targeted, very specific and brilliant research. So I was like, how can we first of all leverage all of these people into a network? Like doing research and development, not me as like some mad scientist, like I'm going to research and develop and, build your product or even act like I can do that. I was like, everything is here in this network. How do we leverage that now into research and development? So we built out this framework to do targeted research within the startup city kind of technology space, built out an additional framework to develop those products and hopefully be able to ship them one day, like centered around this idea of like a consultancy. So myself and leveraging this entire network as a kind of like startup city Web3 tech consultancy. The like very boots on the ground aspect of it is I was like, well, in academia, we do academic journals and we do research journals and we like publish our research. So why don't we just build a platform for everyone, all of our friends, and all these people we talk to every week to publish their research? So we host these weekly Build R&D meetings. Now we're building out our first journal. So it's actually Build Journal. The first edition of it is called Territories. So we theme these every quarter, and the first one is themed around the built environment and people's research and topics and projects they're building around the built environment. So yeah, we have these weekly editorial meetings, and we talk about people's projects and what they're building, and we're going to turn it into a full-blown, like published, like digital and like physical actual copy of a book that you can receive at your doorstep every quarter. And yeah.
I love
Which
it.
is
Yeah, go
Sasha.
ahead.
Sasha, I was going to say, like to that point, Chris is doing an incredible job with that, because you talk about countries where people feel as though their mental framework is stuck, right? And we forget that the American dream, which is what drew you, Sasha, here, and my ancestors, and probably Chris's, because I don't think you strike me as First Nations. And so, like, somehow we all came here on this shared global experiment. And so the American dream is not about a Ford, a white picket fence, and a certain size of home and a pension. The American dream is about permission to go create. And so at some point it got co-opted by an engine with media, radio, television, which quite literally all the cartoons were funded by corporations and the radio shows were funded by corporations to sell products. And so people don't want to talk about that, but that's how we got radio. It got commercialized by corporations to sell. I mean, that's why the Flintstones sold cigarettes, right? So jump ahead, we have people who now look at the American dream as the internet, where they've been exposed to kind of opulence on Instagram or other tools or what have you on social media, which isn't really what America's about. But they see this, they have aspirations without opportunities or access, and it creates an angst. So aspirations, access, angst. If you don't have access or a path to how do you get to what you dream about, you're hosed. And so the angst becomes, well, screw America. America sucks. It's the wrong machine, wrong system, wrong dream. It's not. It's the right dream. It's the right system. It's just they're staring at the wrong wall. And so if there's ways we can take this journal and a better game and better tools and continue to decentralize it and help the world understand, no, you can play the American dream game, and this is how you play it. People will, those who choose to jump on board will jump on board. Those who choose to say, well, people like us don't do things like this, that's fine. Just stay doing what you're doing. Tell me how that works for you. Have fun. If you want to play in Brazil or Kazakhstan or Patagonia or Wyoming or Canada or anywhere in the world, come play. Come play from Guangzhou. Come play from anywhere. And that is where what I see, what comes next post-capitalism, post-communism. There's a world that's out there that is more, I like to refer to it as more as this thoughtfulness around eudaimonianism, which is people building in eudaimonia means human flourishing. People setting goals around what do they believe that will add the most beauty and value to the world that they can create. Go do that. And now you have a community at your back willing to offer you skills, funding, if you're serious, if we believe in you, if you're actually showing up and doing the work, and then government supporting that and systems that then loop back to move those people forward. Instead of a universal basic income, I believe in a project-based incentive to where people are actually declaring projects and working towards that. Does it become a one world government? Does it become some decentralized like thing or amoeba? I don't know, but it's damn better than what we have of people sitting in a malaise in countries going like, well, I just can't play, or staring at the wrong wall in America, thinking capitalism and the American dream is shit too. And so, like, when the idea of a journal that can be distributed to Brazil that says, hey, this is a builder, and not give their face or name necessarily, but like they're in your community,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same game as Fireside Chats at scale with a book. And maybe we fail, right, Chris?
Yeah.
But damn it, it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but look at like, when's the last time? I mean, I don't want to. The answer for me is a long time. But when's the last time either of you have cared about or read an academic journal in the humanities that was interesting to you, or you felt like you actually had to do that? Like compounding all of this research in an interesting way, and all these people in an interesting way, and someone from France writing about 17th century Southern California as a startup city, and someone writing about lithium mines in northern Nevada and how they're redefining the domestic and international like built environment. Like those ideas next to each other, I feel like would, in my mind, create enough like interest and momentum just to pull people around this community. Yeah, and then from there, it's all just leverage. Like if you want someone to develop these ideas for you, if you want to like invest in individuals and concepts, this is the place to do it. This is the sandbox for it.
That's amazing. Nick, I have before we wrap up, I have one more question. And I think every builder and every creative, and I myself personally, had to run into this wall of, okay, I have this grand vision, I'm ready to show up, I'm putting in the work, but then how do I navigate getting the resources? How do you in your projects, in your organization, and within build also, how do you create opportunity?
Yeah. It's an incredible question, and I think it's key, right? Because I think too many people like to think being creative means burning the bridges, and that's the dumbest thing ever. Um, you should burn the bridges on a way of life that leads you to obesity, mental insanity, economic poverty, and civic distrust. Burn the bridges on that shit. And that shit is literally doom scrolling, watching TV, being, in this like cycle where you navel gaze and talk about your past childhood traumas. And instead, put your head up and go find a community where you can share your dreams with people, and then start to iterate on them in that reclaimed, whatever, 3 hours a day you just reclaimed because you're not doing your navel gazing and other things anymore, and turn it into a social activity that as a human, I socially create with others, and they help me and I help them. And this is how we have reciprocity within our community. And I might not have the fanciest shoes or tools or weapons or things, but we can patchwork this thing together and build something of meaning and value. And we're going to, instead of being an incubator or an accelerator, I've realized cities love the aiders, right? Like, give me an incubator, give me an accelerator. And if Chris has spent any time studying where cities put these, they put them at the shittiest airports because they have extra space there. And they're like, look, we have an accelerator at the airport. Why? Because we have extra space. So come bring your startup here and get low cost rent, never leave, and you can die. So instead of calling them an incubator and accelerator, I refer to this concept as a percolator. You need a citywide social system that percolates creativity, innovation, and your projects as a way of life. Now, when you get to a readiness level where you also all of a sudden have something real that's actually ready to be funded, not some nonsense pipe dream from Silicon Valley about a valuation that should get you $1 billion. Talk to me about the unicorns. That's why we say we need wolves, not unicorns. I don't know if Angela shared this with you, but our whole thesis is built on this concept of like, we need wolves. Wolves are scrappy. They're lean. They run in a pack. They're multi-generational. They take care of each other. They play. They deal with their stuff. They fight when they need to. Their contribution to the ecosystem actually adds more value because of their movement and how they act. So similarly, when it comes to startups, too many people think I should have my idea, get $1 billion, and then I sell it to somebody. No. Be that nappy ass wolf. and like running a pack with people where I may not never ship this. It might never become a real thing in the world, but I build it because I love it, I believe in it, and it matters to me. And this is better than sitting on Facebook. And so there's this whole thing of, are there resources to fund things? Yes. Do they often go unused in states? Yes. Do you not get them because you just show up and throw one application into some dark hole and hope someone throws money at you? Yes. That's why you don't get any money. And so instead of just being so pathetic that you sit back and say, when is my check going to show up? And this isn't about you, Sasha. This is just saying societally, show up, do the work with your friends and your peers. And when someone says, well, it's not ready, don't take that as the death nail in the coffin. Take that as the tell me more and let me iterate on this and percolate with it with my friends. So it's less about like, let's raise $1 billion to make sure everyone gets cash to build their projects. And instead it's about, let's all show up and work on the things we love together as a social activity. And when one starts to take off, let's pool our resources and let's talk to our friends. Let's ask for help on the one that's got traction. And let's all make sure we can support that thing as it grows. And if we've built the underlying architecture appropriately, everyone also should take a part in the win because we've tracked how they contributed to the community and the ecosystem as well through contribution on chain as a DAO or an LCA or whatever.
That's beautiful.
But that's my thesis on it. I think VC is effed. That's a whole nother game. But
oh yeah, that's a whole different story. Well, we are about to wrap up. It was a fascinating conversation. Chris, final piece of wisdom for builders who are maybe in some remote location figuring out how to start building and how to engage with this spirit, with this place that is being a builder.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going on Nick's sentiment, I always say that like in architecture, it's like they call them the capital A architects, you know, like your Frank Gehry's, your Frank Lloyd Wright's, like these master thinkers who disseminate a single idea about the built environment from their own, you know, mind and their mind only. And I think just like that, I think the age of the capital B builder might be over. That's something I just made up on the spot, by the way. But yeah, like have your idea seed these things that interest you and you deeply want to see in the world, and engage in these communities and these technologies and allow them to fit like puzzle pieces and layer onto yourself and layer onto other people and other concepts and ideas. Yeah, we live in a beautifully digital global world, and whether it's on chain or off chain, like you just kind of have to chase these things as they pertain to your own interests. And there's a million other people working on things that are different degrees of tangential to your own interests and projects and things that you want to see in the world. And I think Build and companies like it are creating the infrastructure for these people and places, ideas to all come together. So yeah, that's all I got to say. Just join up.
Join Build.
Join Build. Come to the R&D meetings.
Yeah. Nick, any final piece of wisdom here?
I would say, just to kind of close things out, if anything that I've shared or kind of the heart behind it is of interest, I have I wrote a book that's kind of like a pilot of, it's not finalized. I'm in talks with different publishers of how to iterate it, but it's on flourishingpledge.com. And it's called Better: How to Build Creative Communities That Transform the World. And it just took the decade of work and has synthesized it into why and how and what we do. And it talks about Build. It talks about our work with governments. It talks about our work in impoverished communities with billionaires. It's quite fun and a fascinating read that should give some real practical advice and offers you a community as well through Build and through everything else we do. So go check that out if people would. It's EPUB and PDF download for free. There's no cost. I'm not making $1 off of it. Just
oh my God, this is amazing. Everybody has to go get this book. I'm definitely going to go get this book because that's something that I think about a lot. Thank you so much for sharing this. Guys, this was an awesome conversation. I hope to have you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha.
Super fun.
Cheers. That was a fun chat. For more of these, follow The Engine everywhere on YouTube, in your favorite podcatcher. Subscribe to the newsletter. Follow us on social media, on Forecaster, on Twitter, even on LinkedIn. All over the place, you can leave us a message. Tell us, how do you feel about where you live? Is it a startup city? How are you creating an ecosystem for innovation around yourself? Let us know. Check out skylab.xyz and apply to join the community. Check out threshold.network and their Taco Access Control plugin. Check out Build Cities, mint a dream, join the community. All the links are in the description. And that's our show for today. Thank you for tuning in. Struggle well, fellow builder. You can do it. Cheers.